Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to the fifth session of the Autumn 2021 SunoikisisDC Digital Classics. This session is one of several that are on topics around computational linguistics or other digital approaches to linguistics and grammar. This session is on research with Treebanks, so this will not be a tutorial in how to treebank Greek and Latin texts. It will be a discussion of some of the ways in which you can use treebanked corpora in research and so forth. There'll be a bit of an introduction to what treebanking is and so forth, but if you go to the session page, which is linked beneath this video on YouTube, there is a link in the exercises. There is a link to a previous session that was held on research, on actually annotating treebanks yourself. So if you want to try out some treebanking as an exercise, then feel free to go there and have a look at that as well. It's a very good tutorial run by Paulina Yordanova and Vanessa Gorman, so that's worth looking at. Today's session, we will be hearing from Francesco Mambrini from Milan first with an introduction to the concept of treebanking, and then a bit later about some of the tools for querying treebanks. We'll be hearing from Nicole from the University of London about the process of treebanking as a way of getting very close to the language you're looking at with a short case study. And we'll be hearing from Marja Vierros from Helsinki about a particular project and set of tools developed for using treebanks to study the language of Greek Papyri, which she'll tell us a bit more about. And also in the call with us today is Monica Berti, who everybody of course knows as the godmother of SunoikisisDC Digital Classics, who will who's always with us here. Only thing left to say actually is that if you're watching live, please use the live chat, which you'll find to the right of the YouTube video or beneath it, to say hi, introduce yourself, but also to make comments and ask questions and join the discussion at the end of the presentation. So it'd be great. We want to hear from you there. If you're not watching live, this remains available on YouTube. If you're watching this later, obviously you can't join the live discussion, but we're always happy to hear from you. Feel free to either leave a comment or get in touch with any of us. There's usually ways to get in touch. You can track us down quite easily. So without any further from me, I think I'll hand you over to Francesco to give you a brief introduction of today's topic.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Gabriel Bodard and Monica Berti for inviting me here to give this presentation, and thanks to everybody listening. Good afternoon. My name is Francesco Mambrini. I have been working on treebanks and treebanking, especially for Greek, but also for Latin, for actually quite a few years now. And I did both some annotations of text and some research on treebanks. And so my task for today would be just to refresh some ideas that you perhaps may already have heard about treebanks. So just we are all on the same page and we know all what we are talking about when we talk about treebanks. And then after some presentations about projects on treebanking, I will also give a brief overview on a couple of tools that you might find useful for doing linguistic research on treebanks. So without any other words, I would just go directly into a couple of slides that I have to show, just to brush up some ideas about treebanks. So first of all, what are these strange objects named treebanks? The first bullet point that you see is got most of what is important to remember. So you should always remember treebanks are defined as annotated corpora. Both words are important. What are corpora? Corpora are collections of texts that document some language uses, and they could be texts in the most straightforward definition, like, I don't know, the literary works of Greek and Roman literature. And they are annotated. They have some annotation, but not just every type of annotation, some linguistic annotation that is supposed to formalize linguistic aspects that are consistently and annotated word by word. So in order to have a Treebanks, you must have at least 2 layers of information. One is the layer of morphological information, so a description of the word from the morphological standpoint, and most basic way to do that is to annotate the part of speech, so to do what is sometimes called post-tagging in computational linguistics. So to distinguish each word, to apply to each word a tag describing which part of speech this word belongs to. If it's a specific word, more technically speaking, we should say token, because tokens might not always correspond to our own idea of words. So if this token is a verb, is an adjective, is a noun, second layer of information, very important, they should contain descriptions of the syntactic structure of each of the sentences that make up this text that we are annotating. This is a very general definition, because of course you can imagine, if you know something about syntax, you know that it's a very controversial area of linguistic knowledge, and there are many conflicting theories of annotation. Well, in order to, of syntactic interpretation. Well, in order to have a Treebank, so a formalized annotation describing the syntax of a sentence, you must have some guidelines for annotation that adhere to some sort of formalism or theory of the syntax. Broadly, very generally speaking, in very broad terms, there are at least 2 big families, 2 huge families of Treebanks, depending on which view of the syntax they take in a very, very general term. On the left, you can see constituency tree, what we could call a constituency-based tree, that would be part of a constituency-based Treebank. It means that the syntax the syntax is annotated in a way where tokens are not directly put in relation one to each other, but they have different, they build up different layers, different constituent. It's different phrase, a noun phrase, a verb phrase, and now a subsequent noun phrase that is distinguished between a determiner and the noun, and so on. So what you annotate is also this constituent. The other view, it's on the tree in the right, is based on a family of theory of syntax that are known as dependency grammars. And so these trees are known as dependency trees. In dependency trees, you don't have non-terminal, this is a technical term, non-terminal constituents, but only the words that you actually find in the text that are put in relation one to each other, according, again, to some sort of guidelines. So, for example, you can see very easily over here that the subject depends on the verb. The verb is the main element in this tree, and the article, the determiner, is depending on the noun, and so on. So you see that it's more vertical, a little more compact. Now, I won't talk about constituency trees too much, especially because we are here concentrating on classical and ancient languages, and whatever may happen to the world of modern languages, we can definitely say that for Greek and Latin, the dependency view of making Treebanks is the main one, is the winning one. And but it's in the recent years, dependency trees have taken kind of the leading roles also for modern languages in general. I will tell you a little more about that in a second. So this is probably the best way to show you what the Treebank is. So to give you an idea of the type of information that is stored in a file where this annotation is serialized, is stored. This is an XML file from the ancient Greek dependency Treebank, so one of the Treebanks that were created for the ancient Greek texts. It's not that important if you're not familiar with the syntax of an XML file. What is important is to see that how the information is packaged, right, in this file. You see that what you have here is a sentence from a text. If you want to know, it's the Oedipus Tyrannos of Sophocles. And you see only one sentence, but you can make up the idea that the text is divided into sentences. And word by word, you have some annotation. some annotation that contains both the text, the running text that you read when you read the Oedipus Rex, and some morphological information, as I said. Not just the part of speech, but within this attribute that you see here, it's called post tag. You see a full morphological description of this word, because Greek needs quite a few layers of information to describe the morphology of a word. So the fact that, for example, this one is a noun, this complex string describes the fact that the first word, polis, which obviously means city, if you know some Greek, it is a noun, it's singular, it's feminine, and it's, in the case, it's nominative. So all this information is stored in this string. The lemma, so the word that you look up in the dictionary, if you want to, so that you don't, the inflected word is also reported to the canonical form that you find in the dictionary, and the syntax as well. How is the syntax described? According to dependency formalism, as I said before. So you see that, for example, for the word number 12, you have the indication, the index of an head, so a word that this word number 12 is depending on, the word number 9, and the relation that's labeling this relation between head and dependent. There are other ways to store treebank information, but this one is a pretty convenient one, and it's used again for the ancient Greek dependency treebank. So let's talk a little more about dependency treebanks. How many dependency treebanks do we have? So historically, perhaps one of the most important is the Index Domesticus treebank that is developed for Latin, that is developed in the Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore in Milan, where I actually work. And it's annotating the Latin words of the philosopher Thomas Aquinas, so medieval Latin. And it was one of the first treebanks that were made for ancient languages, and was inspired, it took basically the same guidelines for annotation, from the Prague dependency treebank, which, on the other hand, it was one of the first dependency treebank, and one of the most important models for dependency treebank, and it was developed for the Czech, modern Czech language. Then the Index Domesticus treebank developed a standard for annotating the Latin language, together also with a project started in the Perseus project that you may already know for other things. It's called the Latin Dependency Treebank, which was later joined to the Ancient Greek Dependency Treebank to give life to the Ancient Greek and Latin Dependency Treebank. And adopting kind of the same formalism, a few other projects came up with annotating both Greek and Latin. Pedalion, based in Leuven. You might have had a chance to have a lecture by Toon van Haal or Halek Kersmakers, who work with Pedalion and works mostly on Greek. Gorman Trees, a project from Vanessa Gorman, again working on Greek, and Sematia, from which we would know more later on. I would refer to this as a more general term as the Perseus family, because it all adopt a formalism that was first defined by the ancient Greek and Latin dependency treebank with some modification, but yeah, in any case, there we are. And then there is another important project, it's called Proyel, based in Norway, that started as an annotation of all the Indo-European languages, based on the text, the parallel text that could be found in all of them. So the New Testament, but then adding some other text to that. It's also dependency treebank is a little different from in the way they annotate syntax from the Perseus families and the PDT more generally inspired family. But today it's impossible not to mention universal dependencies. So what is universal dependencies? Universal dependencies is a large project that has taken a leading role in probably in the whole tree banking world. And it's a framework with shared guideline for consistent annotation across all possible languages that you might think of. At the moment, they have more than 200 tree banks for more than 100 languages. And they are both more modern and non-standard languages, and ancient languages like Hittite, for example, or cuneiform languages, ancient Greek and Latin, of course. UD treebanks have both a universal, shared across language set of tags and of annotation rules, and they store also some language-specific parts. But again, let me stress that it's a shared framework for annotation. Most likely, universal dependencies, even if now universal dependencies is started to be adopted also for original annotation. So people start annotating using universal dependencies. At the beginning, it was more like a target format to convert annotation into. So for example, all of the projects that I mentioned before, the Index Domesticus, the Ancient Greek and Latin Dependency Treebank, the Proyel project, all have conversions into universal dependencies. So they are also part of these more than 200 treebanks. Now, this became handy before. I said that the dependency treebanks is a very general term because there are many different ways of, many different rules to annotate a text using a dependency formalism, and different formalism that are, generally speaking, dependency based. Here, for example, you can see a different, same sentence from the Index Domesticus treebank in Latin, annotated both in the PDT-based, right, the practice dependency treebank-based original format of the Index Domesticus treebank, and in the UD format, in the UD conversion of the Index Domesticus. So you see that, for example, this is medieval Latin, and you have a sentence like dicit quod, etc., etc. So it's he says, Boethius, in this case, the philosopher Boethius said that. So the verb to say, dicit, governs a preposition, a clause that is introduced by a preposition, and you have this formalism in the PDT base. So the verb governs a conjunction, and the conjunction governs the verb. But it's quite the other way around in the UD, because UD gives more prominence to the lexical words and not the functional words like conjunction. So you have the governed verb, potest, in this case, attached directly on dicit, on the verb, and the quod depending as a leaf node in a way from the potest. And the same thing will also go for the predicate nominate. It is something. It could be, the forma could be the subject. This is how the sentence go. And you see that subjectum is the predicate nominal that depends on the copula verb, on the to be verb, on the left in the PDT based, but it's not the other way around. The copular is a sort of an auxiliary node that it's dependent on the predicate, the nominal in the UD formalism. Why I'm not insisting too much on the grammar. I just want to stress the fact and want you to understand the fact that in order to look for this type of phenomena in a treebank, you have to know the formalism that is behind that. Where is it documented? Well, it's all documented in the guidelines for annotation, where each construction is given some sort of an introduction and an explanation on how it is treated in a certain formalism or in another. That kind of concludes what I wanted to stress for this introductory part. Then we will go back to the tools after the other presentations.
Great, thank you, Francesco. That's brilliant. Again, reminder to people watching: if you have any questions, please leave them in the live chat. If questions turn up in the middle, we may be able to get to them immediately. If not, we'll come to any questions as they appear at the end. Next, I think we're hearing from Nicole, who's going to talk to us, give us a brief demonstration of what you might gain from doing some treebanking.
Hi everyone, my name is Nicole, and as Gabby mentioned, I am a current PhD student at the University of London. And like some of you today, I actually learned about treebanking about a year ago from this very seminar. And I definitely found that this was one module which really stuck out to me, because not only did I find the interface a bit easier to use, but I also thought it was really fascinating in terms of what potential research avenues it presented. So this is definitely to say that because I've only known about treebanking for a year, I am definitely not an expert, but I have found that more recently, I've been doing a lot more treebanking on my own, learning a bit more about it, as well as looking for applications in my own research. And hopefully, maybe some of you will find the same thing, maybe next time or even sooner. So today I have created a presentation which kind of shows you something that I've been working on in my own work. But because we're going to be focusing on the demonstration, I won't be going through the entire presentation. If some of you are interested, that is great. Please feel free to pause on some of my slides, as well as I believe my slides will be made available to at least some of you. But for now, I'll just give you a quick run through before my demonstration. So, just everything okay? Everybody can see, hopefully. So yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Great. I'm going to be demonstrating basically how I would approach tree banking a sentence from the 12 tables. And so here's just some general information on 12 tables. Again, feel free to pause if you want to see, if you want to read the entire thing. The main point I want to make before I demonstrate is the fact that with the 12 tables, while we know pretty much their entire contents, thanks to the fact that they're mentioned quite often in later sources, in terms of the actual original text, a lot of what we have is actually fragmentary. So in my own research, I'm particularly interested in isolating the original text, which is why the sentence that I'm going to be tree banking today is actually a fragment rather than a full sentence, just because I kind of wanted to isolate it from the paraphrased portion. And then, as I said, feel free to read the entire thing, but the main thing is that the fragment that I will be showing you today is from 12 tables 8.1a, which is this sentence, which is "Siquis ocentaviset, sive conmen condiviset, quad infamiam factet flagitium alteri." This is roughly translated to whoever sings a slanderous or harmful song, or whoever composes a song that causes dishonor or disgrace to another, and then in square brackets, shall suffer capital punishment. Again, the square brackets are there to show that section is actually paraphrased. It's not verbatim from the original text. So that is why I have left it out of this Latin fragment, and that's why I will not be tree banking with it. So there we are. Again, a few other grammatical notes if you want to have a look. And then this is the tree bank that I have, but now I'm going to take you to the actual Arethusa program to show you essentially how I would approach a fragment like this one. So are we okay? Hopefully. So again, the main thing that we want to kind of, when we're attempting to tree bank this fragment, the main issue, as I said, is that I've left out that last clause, which really is our main clause if we were to include it, because this is a conditional sentence. So basically, our first issue is that we don't really have a main clause. So what do we do when we don't have a main clause? We're going to have to treat something else kind of like a main clause. So what we have here is we have like a double protasis in a conditional sentence with another relative clause, which is dependent on that second protasis. So because of that, because I do have already one clause that is already dependent on another, I'm actually going to treat these two double protases as my main clauses. Now, usually the first thing you want to do, or at least that I find I want to do, is I want to look for the verb. But even prior to that, you want to check to see if there is an initial conjunction in a clause, and in this case, there are. In both of these protases, you have a C and a C. But even on top of that, which is very unique to the situation, you have this way suffix, which is basically linking these two clauses, these two entire clauses. So to begin with, I'm going to want to attach that to my root. And as you can see, morphology is very picked up. It's a conjunction. We're going to want to give it the label of coordinate and attach it to the root. Next, we can then move on to our initial conjunctions. So then we're going to give them the label of auc. But in this case, because they are coordinating with each other, we're also going to give them that little suffix I love to call of co as well. And so we're going to attach each one to way. Right. Now we've done that, we can finally move on to our verbs. And because we are treating these double protases like we would our main clauses, we are going to give them the label of predicate, but again, with that, what I like to call the suffix of co, because they are coordinated with each other. And again, and then what we are left with. So in that first protassive first clause, we have quis. It's acting as the subject in that clause. So we are going to give it the label of subject and attach it to that predicate. Then we have Carmen left in the second one, and that is acting like the accusative or the direct object of the clause. So again, we'll give it the label of object and attach it to the predicate. Now what we are left with, so we've dealt with these two double protases, we have this relative clause to deal with. And again, this relative clause, the quod infamiam faceret flagitium re alteri, is actually qualifying Carmen from the second clause. So we will be attaching this essentially to Carmen. So in this case, we can start with the verb of this clause. It's faceret. And because it is attributing to Carmen, we are going to give it the label of attributive and attach it there. Now, the other thing we want to do just quickly, as you can see, is we have a comma that is separating these clauses. And just to quickly clean that up, because it is separating the relative clause from the rest of the fragment, we are just going to actually attach it to facret as well, which is sort of, in a way, in my sense, acting as kind of like the anchor to this clause. Just going to move that up there. Now, the next part would be we have quad, which, again, referring to Carmen, but is acting like the subject in this clause. So we'll give it that label and attach it to faceret. And then I'm just going to skip to alteri for a second because this is acting like the indirect object. Nice and easy, but we'll still give it the label object and attach it to faceret. And then we can finally deal with infamium, flagitium, and way. Because again, in this case, the way is just basically coordinating infamium and flagitium, the two nouns, rather than in like the first case where it was coordinating two entire clauses. So that's why I could leave it until the end. So that's why it is important to kind of have an idea, a vague idea of the translation first before immediately trying to tree bank. So in this case, we will give it, again, the coordinator label. And then finally, we can just attach these with, they're acting as direct objects, so object, but with the co suffix, and attach them to way. And once again, same thing with magnesium. So there we are. Let me just try to zoom out a bit so you can see the entire. That is basically how I would approach tree banking a fragment from a particular text. And just very quickly, because I don't want to take too much time, as I said, just very quickly, if you kind of compare the that tree bank to a few of the other sentences or fragments, I should say, in the 12 tables, I've basically been able to sort of do a comparison between them in order to kind of derive a potential conclusion about the vague interpretation, traditional interpretation of this fragment. So there we are. That's pretty much it, very brief. And there we are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicole. That's really useful. So I think next Marja is going to talk to us about PapyGreek, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, or is it PapyGreek?
It's however you want it to be. But Papy is a relevant part of the PapyGreek project. Okay, so good evening, everyone. I'm Marja Vierros from Helsinki, and I'm running this project called Digital Grammar of Greek Documentary Papyri. So I'll present some of our research, and we are basically basing quite a lot of it into Treebanks, but also something else. So I'll be talking about that. So you are now seeing my slides, apparently. Okay. And there's my email. If any of you have any questions directly to me, please feel free to write. This is shortly about the project, our team. At the bottom of the slides, there's the general website that's presenting the project at the university website, but then under it there's the address to the portal of ours, which I'll be presenting and demoing a little bit. There are some tools for tree banking and also for querying, and there's some data, and it's all still work in progress. So a little bit what we have now. We have made a first sort of stable data release in July about our treebanks. There's the DOI. I don't know how do you use DOI? How do you say it in English? We just say
DOI.
Yeah. So it's about 44,000 tokens, about almost 400 papyrus texts, 3,000 sentences. So it's not a huge data release yet, but there's more to come. The annotation and reviewing process is something that takes quite a lot of time. There will very soon be out a publication about this dataset in Journal of Open Humanities Data. And the data is also, you can also find the sort of most up-to-date data from our portal. The latest versions of the Treebanks are available for download through the portal as well. But the stable data release is of course something that if you're using things for publications, you should use stable things that are for the sake of replicating the queries, for example. We have used the Treebanks, not actually, the data release was not quite finished yet, but in our one sort of small research question we had about genitive absolutes. There's a publication also coming out soon that we also spoke about in the last year's Sunoikisis, I think, with Paulina. So there are some publications you can refer to in the future. And there's also, we have many things under preparation. This is one about phonological variants in Greek documentary papyri. And I'll be presenting today the tool that we used in this study. A little bit first about our source material, because I'm not sure if everybody is so familiar with papyri. So the corpus has its limitations and advantages. It's restricted, both sort of, well, in many ways. One is geography. So you see the map of Egypt there. Basically, our papyri come from Egypt. The papyrological corpus also includes ostroka, for example, so lightweight writing materials, not only papyrus, but also some other materials, but basically papyri that you see on the right. One example from the Helsinki collection is on the right-hand side of the slide. So that's the other limitation. We have the corpus, the texts are often fragmentary. There are gaps, but the corpus is about 50,000 documents about 5 million tokens with digital transcription in the Duke Databank of Documentary Papyri, the papyri.info. You can query that in the papyri.info directly as well. And we have used that data as our basis. So we are grateful for having that resource. There are several text types, but documents, so letters, contracts, administrative text, and so on. It's a direct source from the pens of the ancient scribes, and the time range is quite big, almost 1,000 years. But since it's a direct source, we get quite a lot of interesting information linguistically from that material. So about the writers, who is the writer, who is the author, for example, different registers of language, and all possible sociolinguistic phenomena. And then contact linguistics is one important field where we can use the papyri, because obviously Greek was sort of minority language in Egypt, and there was always other languages at play together with Greek in that area. There's lots of variation in this material because it's produced for everyday purposes. So it's not as polished as high style literature. So there are also spelling mistakes, but morphology and syntax has also its own variation in this material. So it's there's lots of advantages in this material as well. So we can study language change, its chronology and speed and directions through this corpus. And quickly in the project, we approach it like this. So we have Treebanks that you already are familiar with, but it's time consuming. So we only have we'll ever only have parts of the whole papyrological corpus Treebanked, I suspect. But with the Treebanks, we can study syntax. There's morpho-syntactic annotation, like Francesco presented. And because we have papyri, we have the variations in the way that we annotate both what we have in the original papyrus and then what the papyrus editors have regularized. So this is how we get to the orthographic and morphological variation. Syntactic variation is something that the Treebanks in themselves perhaps offer answers to. And then for the whole corpus, we have morphological annotation. We have had the fortune of using Alec Kersmaker's automatically tagged corpus of papyri. You saw in the first course, I think, of this semester, Alec was presenting Trismegistus words. So this is basically the same data we are using as a basis. But as he mentioned, the automated parser makes some wrong guesses with some forms that look like the same. So they don't know always how the machine doesn't know, the algorithm doesn't know how it's supposed to be. So with the Treebanks, when we check them, we can sort of correct those if there are mistakes made by the automated parser. And then for the phonological search tool or the orthographic search tool, this is based on the regularizations made by the editors, as I mentioned. So without further ado, I will present one research question that you can use our tools and the linguistically annotated data. There would be several research questions that I could present, but I will just limit myself with one here. Well, in general, the treebanks, for example, would be very useful for studying word order, and there are some people doing that, like Polina Jordanova. So these are used in multiple ways. So this is just one snippet of what can be done. So I'm looking at the Koine Greek development of the ending of as being replaced by the ending s. In nominal, well, with the noun phrases, nouns, there is, I'm sorry that this is a bit sort of small in the slide. It looks like that, but I hope you can see. And you have the slide shared in the Sunoikisis page. So in description of Koine Greek, Vít Bubeník, for example, said that in nominal morphology, various trends ushering in the medieval and ultimately modern state of affairs are observable in private inscriptions and Egyptian papyri. Here belong the use of s for us in the accusative plural of athematic nouns. And the grammar of Roman and Byzantine papyri by François Gignac, he mentions that the nominative plural s is occasionally used for the accusative plural of masculine and feminine nouns of the third declension. So the same thing that was said above. And Gignac has 19 examples from the Roman period, Roman and Byzantine period. And he says that this use reflects the middle stage of the process by which the nominative supplanted the accusative in the plural. Many of the above examples are found in connection with numerals and designators of quantity, in which the nominative s first came to be used for the accusative as in various ancient dialects. So obviously there is a change going on, and it would be nice to know a little bit more. There was one addition in Gignac about the adjective pas, everything, all, that the accusative plural masculine is frequently replaced by the s of the nominative as in the dental stem. Conversely, the accusative plural as is used sporadically for the nominative. So you can see that the descriptions given in the grammar are using quantification very vaguely. So there are terms like frequently or sporadically. So it would be nice to have sort of actual numbers about these developments so that we can further say something about the chronology and where it appears first, for example. But yes, so basically s is used instead of as, and sporadically the other way around is what we get from here, from nouns. Then in verbs, the same endings do occur for aorist and perfect second singular. So again, Bubeník says that there's interparadigmatic leveling of irregular morphology of the strong aorist, where classical forms epon and epes said are being replaced with epa, epas by analogy of the sigmatic forms, sa, sas. The second person singular indicative ending s of the second aorist in imperfect is quite often substituted from the ending as of the first aorist. So again, Gignac's words about the same phenomenon. And Gignac says that it's widely paralleled in inscriptions, but not very common in Ptolemaic papyri or in Koine literature. So this sort of gives the view that, okay, maybe it's then common in Roman papyri, but we don't get the clear view. And so on, and it's this led to the retention of this ending s in the predominantly inflection of the modern Greek aorist. The medieval grammar, the Cambridge grammar of modern late medieval Greek says about this that by the beginning of the late medieval Greek period, a common set of past tense endings combining elements from the aorist, the imperfect and the perfect was already firmly in place for the active voice. So the development for the late modern Greek had led also to sort of merging of all these endings, so that, well, first of all, there was a period when we have s instead of us, or us instead of s. And so there are these two sets of endings, on and s, and us in the other paradigm, and they merge. There's a period when they are used sort of side by side. And in modern Greek, or already the late medieval Greek, there's the first person ending a and second s, but we are now looking at the second person ending. So in the slides, I have some screenshots about the querying things, but I will switch now to showing PapyGreek website where we can do the queries. So first, we are now in the first page, well, the main page where you come when you get to the portal. You can use this without signing in, but then if you sign in, you can also then annotate, for example, if you wish. I will now sign in just in case. You can sign in with Google credentials. I'll first show a little bit about what we have for annotated papyri. For the documentary papyri, what we have sort of under finalized are basically now what's in the first data release. Maybe there is also already something more. You can look at these individually if you will, but I will just show it quickly. We can here look at the view where we can see the text, which is the same as in the papyri.info, but with a sort of slightly different view. You can see the variation when there is a regularization of the editor. You can see it. Are you seeing the correct screen, by the way?
Yes, but do you think you could increase the font size a little bit, Marja?
We'll try. Hang on. Okay, this doesn't work as I was hoping. Right. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah.
So yes, the regularizations you see here that we have dative case instead of genitive case in this, and wrong gender in this relative pronoun, for example. And you can look at the annotations. If you click on a view, you don't get all those buttons if you sign in. Here I clicked on the original side, so there is gaps in this first sentence, so this is not annotated because it's gaps. But in the regularized side, we have annotated this part. But here you see the tree banks. So you can look at these trees if you will, but you can also export. Sorry, there's a long history of what's been done. You can export this individually if you want, but then you can also export all the data from here. You can choose if we want the original or regular part. So if you want to annotate yourself, you can go to collections and select a text that you want to annotate. But we are now going to look at the S and ask question that I was talking about. So we go to this variations tab, which is basically the search interface that we have now. By the way, Francesco mentioned Seematia, so now we have the whole portal of PapyGreek, but the annotation part is called Seematia, and our variations or search is called Paratypa, where we have the orthographic search tool. So we have sort of two different underlying small projects here. So if we want to be finding endings, noun endings or verbal endings, that's one thing. Then you might have already been thinking that, okay, if we have epsilon and alpha varying between themselves, is it perhaps something more general that we have epsilon and alpha being confused? So we could start by looking at only this letter. I'm now forgetting my keyboard commands. So, but here we can look only. This middle field is something where it's the main search field. You can search what's in the original papyrus and what's in the regularized. And here you can note already that we have replacements, additions, deletions, or unchanged, or any. So you need to choose one of these. If you don't know what they are, there is the help page that you can look for. There's the help page for annotation first, and then it continues as the search interface help. So we are looking for epsilon and regularized as alpha, and I don't want anything else being in this replacement, so I'm turning these little arrows to the centers. They are basically replacing regular expressions here. You can use regular expressions in general for this search interface. It's slower, but it's possible. So we can just look at, there's lots of other things here. We are not using them yet. We can just hit search. And since this is quite, well, it didn't take that long, but now we see results that there is 1,435 entries it found of the regularizations of epsilon to alpha. And we can see that not all of them are in the ends of the words, but some of them are. We can sort of have different ways how these are presented here. If we want it to be, now it's alphabetically, so we can change it to go sort of for the, this is for the dating. So there are some things that are not dated for the beginning date, but then it begins from the Ptolemaic period, the oldest attestations first. But you can, of course, order it in the other way. There's a small arrow doing it in the other way. Now we get the latest examples first. But you could also filter the date here. So you could say that we only want to be looking at things that are from the BCE era. It doesn't really matter that much where it is. We can hit search again, so we get the number of how many entries are from the BCE era. It's only 105 from the 1400. So yes, it's a clearly later phenomenon. Then, if we would rather want to look at the endings, then we can use the immediate letter that's coming after. So there are, of course, other endings that we could look, like n or an. And again, if I close this arrow down, it takes really us to the end of the word. Okay, only 28 entries for n instead of an in the papyri. Not very much. We can also leave this empty, but have the arrows closed, so it's giving us really the end of the word. So now we have the variant only at the end of the word. There's 70 of them. Okay, still not so much. Now let's try the ending s and as, so we can use the final sigma. It is convenient. So 869 entries. So okay, we can start making some sort of conclusions that obviously this change seems to happen at endings or ending of word. So if we count together those three queries we did now for the en, an, or just a, and then this s, as, it's like something 70% of all the e for r queries for the 1400 examples we had. So there's more of this change happening in the endings of the words, but then again, also in the middle of the words. So there might be just sort of other phonological processes going on, but it seems that it really affects these endings of the word. It may have something to do with prosody, where the word stress is. The unstressed vowels are often a bit weakly pronounced. All sorts of things can happen, but basically it seems like, yes, the endings are, perhaps there's something more to it, that it's not just phonological, that the endings are being confused for the morphology of them. So there's something we can look at on the morphological side of things. If we want to refine things for, now we have all the verbs and all the nouns and all that here together, lumped together, but we can start using the morphological information. So we can look, sorry, now I'll have to switch back to some other alphabets. So we can look here. You need to know what the post-tag codes are, but for the verb it's V. We can look at the second person, how many of those 800 is in the verbal endings. You may have...
Marja, we're getting a little bit short on time, so we probably ought to move on to the last part in a minute, if that's okay.
Yes. Okay, it's also taking longer time. I use this regularized for the part of speech tag because in the original we would only have tree-banked data, and here in the regularized side we have the automated data from Alec Guessmakers. I will just quickly show the M part of speech, which is the numeral. So, okay, well, PapyGreek decided that, yes, okay, so it's, yeah, here. So 300 of those 800 something are in fact numerals. So now we can corroborate what Gignac said, that yes, it's mostly on the quantifiers. And almost all of these are the word tessares. So here, this is interesting, and this would, I mean, we could do different types of searches for, I don't know, for how long, but then eventually we would get some sort of linguistic conclusions about this, what's happening and when and what might be the reasons and so on. So this was just example how you can play with the data. And of course, these queries can also be exported from here. So then you get Excel table where you can actually continue playing with the data, the query results on your Excel sheet. So sorry for talking long, but yes, we can move on now.
Great, thank you very much. Hand back to Francesco. You're still muted, Francesco.
Sorry, yes. So thank you to Nicole and Marja that really gave us a very good example of what you can do with Treebanks. What I want to do in this session is a little more in general, showing you a couple of tools that will help you doing, if you're interested, the same thing that Marja showed for with the PapyGreek interface, more in general, on the annotated data from the collections that I mentioned before. General note to begin with, in general, yes, most of the time it's typical for projects like a little bit like PapyGreek that Marja showed, to have their own tools, maybe most of the time online apps or downloadable apps that can work with these tools. But there are also some more general purpose tools that can be used. In general, it's the situation is sometimes a little bit frustrating because sometimes you would like to take advantage of everything that you got, and even if, like Nicole did, you have some annotation of your own, to be able to use tools to do something on your own annotation. For that, you really need to tinker a little bit with tools and formats and everything, and probably be ready to code a little bit. It's a little more advanced. That's basically what I do for most of the time. But with what is already available and usable for end users without so much experience, there is already something you could do. And that's what I wanted to show you. I would like to show you two tools. One of them is called DendroSearch, and it was developed in the context of the Pedalion project that I mentioned before. But it really works with a kind of a much larger collection. Because it can really be used to query all what I mentioned before as the Perseus family of Treebanks for ancient Greek, though, only for ancient Greek. It's a very easy application that works very well. You can download it. It's a Java application that basically could be started with a double click from a Mac, Windows, or a Linux computer. I have it already running on my computer so that I can show you. I'm sorry I cannot do anything with for the fact that the font is very small. The size is very small of this writing, so you have to kind of trust me. And I will run a little bit as quick as I can, as I know that since I know that in any case you can always go back on YouTube and rewatch and pause the videos if you need to concentrate more on some of the steps that I will show you. You see here that this window is divided into three areas, and the left one is a long list of tree banks. As I said, basically all the tree banks that the developers could lay their hands on, and that are either annotated using the same standards that Nicole also showed for her experiment in annotation, the one of the ancient Greek dependency tree bank, or that could be easily converted into it, like the Proyel tree banks that I mentioned before from Oslo, that are annotated in a quite peculiar standard, but could be converted, and they did, the developer of Pedalion did, to the Perseus format. And so this is what we could do. Unfortunately, it's not easy to, these texts don't seem to be in a very straightforward order. So if they're kind of mixed up, so you have really to scroll a little bit to find them out. But anyway, I found the Proyel tree banks from the New Testament and the histories of Herodotus over here. You see that's the number. So before I mentioned the nominal predicates, so I think that this is a pretty good way to start. So it's a construction like, I don't know, roses are red, something like that. So you have a subject, the copula, a verb to be, or equivalent in any language, and either an adjective, a noun, or anything else that could be interpreted as a nominal predicate. That's a kind of an easy structure to look for in a tree. So why don't we start from there? Even here in the left-hand side of the window, you have a tabular form, a little bit like the one that in Pedalion, where you can fill out the information from the different tree bank tokens that you want to look for. So first node that we would like to look for is the copula, form of the verb to be. Remember, we are in ancient Greek. In ancient Greek, the verb is lemmatized as eimi. So we look for the lemma, eimi. And we can either enter the Greek ourselves, so like that, right? Or if we are not familiar and we don't have a Greek keyboard ready, we can write it in beta code. Beta code is a formalism to write in ASCII character ancient Greek. If you're not particularly familiar with that, you can find in Perseus side in the word query tool, you can have an image showing you how to write Greek in beta code, something like that. So eimi would be written something like that. Sorry, eimi, the accent goes on the E. And you can convert it in Unicode pretty easily. So we want that node. Once you've filled out everything that you need to do in Pedalion, you have to generate the node. You highlight the node because now we want to have those two elements that belong, those two tokens that are governed from the subject and the object. Remember that all the time. Oh, by the way, why not? If you want to edit something, I would like to also to specify that I don't want participle. I don't know why, but I think it makes sense. So again, you can either fill out the string for with the morphological analysis as I did before, or you can go here. And for example, you can specify that you want the indicative, the subjunctive, the optative, why not the imperative, and the infinitive. So right there, we can generate the post tag. And I think that it's going to be like that. Right.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Can I? I'm sorry for yes. Please, if you can hide that thing.
Oh yeah.
Preventing
Sure.
our view. Thank you.
I don't know. Okay, let's move it out. Yes, you're right, and it was kind of in the way for me as well. I hope it's better right now. So okay, right now we highlight the tool and we generate some dependent nodes from that. So we can always remember to blank everything that you. Oh, by the way, I don't know if you noticed, but what was the syntax of this string that it was entered here in the post? It's a regular expression, of course, because you remember the brackets around the different values that could be filled for this position. So either you use this interface as I did, or you know how to write a regular expression yourself, and you can fill it if you want. So right now we want a node, and this node should be a subject, right? So we can over here. No, this is the part of speech. Not interested in that. You have to edit the add dependent node. It's edit syntactic relation over here. So I want a subject that I will find here. So again, and well, I'm happy to include all the coordinates so that you see that it generated a regular expression as well. So we go ahead and add a dependent node. You see that in this window, we have created a node with a subject relation. We do the same thing for the again, we highlight the head that we want. And we add the predicate nominal, which is labeled pnom. Here we go, generate the syntactic relation and add a dependent node, and hopefully it will work. Oh no, what did I say? always remember to blank the values before. This is not particularly user-friendly, if you want my opinion, but anyway, it's done like that, it's not that difficult, right? But always remember to do that. Edit syntactic relation, predicate nominal, generate syntactic relation, and now let's add the dependent node. Yeah, we can go on, and now we can search the tree banks that we have highlighted. Otherwise, it will go, we'll look for everything. Here is how the results are presented to you. Some information, the number, the corpus that you are interrogated, the text, the reference. So, for example, here is Gospel of Matthew 1.23, and the results are the full string of the sentence with the bracketed words that match your criteria. So on and so forth. Probably not the easiest representation of the sentence, but anyway, you have your representation. You can save and export your results. Another interesting thing that you can do over here is to specify some order constraint, right? So, for example, we want the subject to be before the verb. We can specify that node number 2 must be before number 1, and so we will add the order constraint. Oh, sorry, in this case it's the predicate nominal, not a problem. So we'll have like, for example, the order predicate nominal verb subject, some sort of a marked order. So in this case, right now we want then, in order to have this order, to have the number 1, so the verb, before number 3, so that the sequence that we have is 2, 1, 3. We add the order constraint, and now we search the tree bank again, and you see that right now, in fact, we have pnom, auton, okay, so Estin, Basileia, the subject, so that we have this order. So this is useful to do this type of queries, either on the morphology alone, on the lemma alone, or on the very basic syntax. Why do I say basic syntax? Because obviously, from this interface, you cannot do some more complicated queries like I don't know, or there is not a very intuitive way to do more complicated queries like I don't know, a node that is governed to in any height. So the ancestor, not just the children, but the ancestors of a node, right? So dependent on many different several different steps. This type of relations, they are kind of blocked out from this interface. Another tool that I wanted to show you is, and again, I'm running a little bit, but hopefully you'll be able to follow, is a tool to query the universal dependencies. There are actually quite a lot of them to query the universal dependencies, collection of tree banks. My favorite one is the PML3 query. That is developed by the Prague, it's always in the context of the Prague dependency tree bank, and is available as a web application at this address. And you can also find it in my slides. The link is also in my slides if you want. So if you go to that address, you'll be able to browse the tree banks, and you see that there are actually a lot of tree banks for a lot of languages, because also there is not just the universal dependencies, but even the universal dependencies. So let's select, for example, the Latin. English is also an option. You see that there are a lot of tree banks, including the Index Domesticus tree bank that I mentioned before, and the universal dependencies in all its release. So down to the 2.8, which is the last one. So let's select the ProYel tree bank again from the universal dependencies distribution 2.8. And let's see how the interface goes. now I have already the query written down, but let's rewrite it. You see that you must first create some nodes. There are actually a lot of types of nodes because there are a lot of tree banks. In UD, what you need is called a node. Don't ask me why. I could tell you, but it could take a little longer. So let's just remember that we need a node. And then we can specify the feature that we want on this node. For example, for this node, we want, for example, we are in Latin. Let's look for the, I don't know if you know that, but it's a very common construction in Latin. It's the cum plus subjunctive of the verb to say something like, as I was going somewhere, or since I was going, or although I was going. It would be expressed with a cum plus subjunctive in Latin many times. So let's look for some example of that. So what we need is a node. By the way, you will remember that the conjunction in universal dependencies are annotated as dependent from the verb. So in this case, we will need first a governing verb that it's in subjunctive. So let's write down this. This is the way you do that. You see that an a node has a lot of attributes, and you can scroll down. In this case, this comes from like that. So it's EZ mood equal to, and you have to remember how it is spelled in universal dependencies. Obviously, how do you do that? You read the documentation. There's no other way around. I did it, and so I remember. So here now we are asking for all the subjunctive. Right now, let's ask for the subjunctive governing another a node that has the lemma equal to cum, and the deprel, the relation equal to mark, which is the way conjunction depends. So let's see if I did some mistakes or if everything works. It appears to be working. You got cum inciperet, cum lux inciperet, which is a perfect example of cum plus subjunctive. But what is cool of this tool is that it also give you the opportunity to use some filters, some output filters to get information. Like, would it be nice to see whether I don't know, the present or the imperfect or the plusquamperfect subjunctive is used more often than the other? So we can have this type of tabular results. How do you do that? You use the syntax for the filters, for the output filter. So it's a little bit complicated, but first of all, you will need to give a name to this a node, and it's here how you do it in PLT in the PMLTQ. So you give a name to that variable, and then you ask that for this variable you want to have is at tens. Okay, so the information on tens. What does this do? This would give us a list, a table, a very minimal table with all the subjunctives and their value of tens. Now, what we need is rather a more compact version, and we can do that. We can ask that for looping on the first column, so in this case, we will call it number 1 of this table. We want that variable and a count for that variable. So here we are. So this is simple path. It's the perfect subjunctive. Again, you should read the documentation to know what is their value and how they correspond to, how these strings correspond to your notions of grammar. And calculation, this kind of looks like an error over here. But anyway, this is also useful to get some problems in annotation and so forth. So this is a very flexible and very complex tool. Here, for example, you can do exactly what I said. So you can specify the type of relation. If you don't put anything, it's equal to put child. So the node that you specified here is linked with the child relation. But there are many relations, as you see. For ancestor is one of them. So you will look for a node with lemma cum and a deprel mark in the whole subtree of this of the first node named hey, and so on. So this was a very, very quick introduction. There is a link in my in the lessons to the documentation also of PML tree query. And of course, I'm always available for questions and everything.
Great, thank you, Francesco. That's That's very cool. I think it'll be really interesting to play with those and see. Play with all three of the tools we've seen: the Paratipa and the DendroTree and the universal dependency search. I think that'll be an interesting exercise for us all to try out. Just a quick note before, while we're waiting, if anyone has any questions or comments in the chat, please feel free to leave them now. Just a quick note about the exercise for this session. You'll see if you look at the session page that we've put two parts to the exercise. The first part is to watch a preceding session and learn how to do a little bit of Greek and Latin tree banking yourself and try it out on some sample sentences. This is a session that was run by Paulina and Vanessa, as we said a couple of years ago. And there's also an option to use a universal dependencies grammar and Treebanks from English instead, if you prefer. Or I guess you could do other languages as well, but the Arethusa interface that we recommend for tree banking, I think specifically has the grammar for English universal dependencies. So there's very, very basic instructions there and a pointer to where you can go and read a little bit more about that. For my students, I've asked them to choose one of the three languages, English, Latin or Greek, and to get into groups of people doing the same language and discuss the work as they go until next week, and then we'll discuss it in the seminar. Others may have different ways to approach this. I don't know if you want to say any words to your students, Monica, about what you want them to do for this session, but or they already know. And then there's a second part to the exercise which Francesco has talked about. I'm looking for the page now, which gives you some suggestions to go, yes, to DendroSearch, and if you want to, also go to PMLTQ and do some queries of the kind he suggests there. You can, of course, do either of the exercises. You can, of course, try some of your own queries. As well as, or instead of the ones that are being suggested.
Or for example, Gabby, you can combine them, because it really happens many times, especially when you're not familiar with guidelines. Like, for example, the guidelines for annotation in universal dependencies in English, that you don't know. If you find, for example, a phrase like "in spite of," and you don't know how "in spite of" is annotated, well, you can simply go and search in the corpus of universal dependencies, look for the phrase "in spite of," and see how it's.
Brilliant. That's a really good idea. Yeah. If I'd thought of that when I was experimenting with universal dependencies earlier this afternoon, that would have saved me a lot of time. Cool. So as I say, for my students, exercise 1, learn how to do a bit of tree banking and try it out yourselves, is the compulsory part of the exercise. Exercise 2, try out some of these searches that Francesco has suggested for us, is something that, if you're interested, you really should give it a go, because I think it'll be really useful. You'll get a sense of why this is important and why this is valuable. But as I say, the important part that I'm going to sort of insist on for my students is doing a bit of tree banking yourself, because I think that's a really important exercise. Does anyone else want to add anything?
Well, I can add a few things, yes, for my students, but given that in my classes I have, well, there are students who are classicists, so they can experiment with the tree bank in classical languages. There are also students who are, let's say, computer scientists. I'm using this label, I don't like it anyway. So definitely in the class outline, you have a complete description, but you can access the guidelines to get a sense of what we are talking about. There are also papers, and then, of course, if you have an interest, you can access already annotated data, which is interesting, but also for classicists. And this is I think, an important thing about these corpora we have. So at the beginning, you can feel lost. It's not so easy to definitely to annotate these texts, but you can access already annotated data to see how it works. So this is for my students, but in general for students or other people who are following this session for the first time, or if they are new to this topic. But the guidelines, I think, are well, not easy, but they give a sense. And then in any case, there is a long list in the session with there are 2 seminar readings, but also other further readings where you can really find many interesting aspects of this topic. I don't know if, okay, yeah, please, Gabby.
Yeah, no, I just want to say that's I'm glad you mentioned that some of the people following this are not necessarily classicists in the normal sense of, you know, being fluent in both Greek and Latin, or you know, may not be classicists at all in the sense that they're here from a computer science or informatics or digital humanities background. And for those, I think it's quite useful. I mean, even if your interest is in how these things are queried and what people do with this, which is what we've been focusing on today, and how you might implement these query tools, as I think all three presentations have shown, in order to be able to query and make any sense of these tree banks, you have to understand how they're encoded and what the formalism is and what the syntax is. And so for that, it's really useful to have tried it out a little bit yourself. So I think even if you don't have Greek or Latin, but you know you're fluent in English or fluent in German or some other modern language, you know, treebank a few sentences in a language you are comfortable in using universal dependencies, just to get a sense of the sorts of decisions you have to make, the sorts of things you have to look up, even if you thought it would be obvious. Those sorts of questions, that really helps you to get a grip on what the language is, what the formalism is, and how you would, you know, how, as Francesco was saying, it really that really dictates how you compose a search across these queries, is how they've been formalized. So I think I would suggest, you know, to anybody to at least have a go at tree banking a little bit of English in universal dependencies, just to really get under the skin of how tree banking works.
Yes, as we mentioned for other topics, so start with the language and the text you know, because you know the problems. You know the language, of course, first, and then you know the text. And then, of course, it's not easy, but is where you can start experimenting with these annotations. And another important thing, well, today we have seen different projects, many interesting research questions, and also, thanks to Nicole, an example, okay, how to work with Treebanking. But one thing, and now unfortunately we don't have much time, but Marja at the beginning, she said, this is the first release of our project. Okay, let's say this is not much data. Well, okay. I know that being humanists, we always have these problems. So to say that we don't have enough data, but there is a big but, because we know how difficult and time consuming it is to produce this data. So we have to mention this, because yes, in the digital humanities, we always have this problem about big data. But in this case, so to produce this data requires a lot of time. I don't know if you want to add something. This is another big topic, but this is, I think, important for our community, because we already have a lot of data, because there is a lot of work. So maybe just a few notes about that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And yes, we have quite a lot of data on the literary side. That's true, big corpora in a way. And for our papyrus tree banks, I was just mentioning that it feels like we have so much work to do and so on. But basically, still, even if we have 1% of the whole papyrological corpus, that's still quite useful to have, even that 1%, because it helps to develop the automated parsers, because there are problems in those. And of course, our data is not flawless. there are mistakes. Every corpus has mistakes of one sort. The automated corpora have other types of mistakes, and those that are produced by humans, they have other types of mistakes. But still, there are, we get tendencies from those as well, and they help building also the automated tools. And all this sort of, it all gets on top of each other. It's incremental, and it stays there, and you can use it later on for many different kinds of things, and you can enhance the annotations in different ways later on as well. But yes, that was a good point.
Yes, not to speak of the fact that, as you mentioned, also we have literary papyri, but then you're working on documentary papyri, which is within papyrology, a significant part of it with other complexities. And then, well, we are still in a moment where we are experimenting a lot. A few years ago, there was, well, I can't say nothing, because papyrology is, well, maybe a small field compared to other fields, but it's true that papyrologists are pioneers, because they began many years ago to experiment with different digital technologies. And then now we have also linguistic annotations, but still there is a lot of work that we have to do. And so, and speaking of treebanking, on a personal note, I remember when Francesco and I were working in the same office a few years ago. Well, now we are here, but really many things have been produced in these let's say 10 years now, and still a lot has to come. So we can be optimistic, but there is a lot of work still to do. So this is why we have to I think, to comment a bit on this part. So we don't have, well, we already have a lot of data, but still to come.
Great. Anyone else have any final words? Then maybe
I can sort of advertise that there are, since Francesco, thank you for showing the DendroSearch and the PML tree query. They are very good, and compared, for example, what we have now in PapyGreek, we can't basically yet search for the syntactic relations at the moment, but then again, there are other tools being developed that can be used for querying our trees as well, quite powerful tools, so stay tuned for those.
Including the DendroSearch, right? It's I think Alec has included the at least some release of yours. I don't know if
there's a small set of old annotations of Sematia as well, yes. But I guess I could also download our data there and use it on my own. I suppose it would work. Yes, I haven't yet done that, but I have used the DendroSearch, so it's quite nice, sort of simple interface. Whereas when you compare it to the others, where you have to know the language, the query language, which seems quite terrifying at first. But then again, even I have managed to learn those, so everybody could do that, I guess, if they want to. So there are many possibilities, but I think, yes, it's good to know several different ways of querying the data, because then you can check your results. If you get similar results, or if you suddenly get very different results, it's sort of
might be a problem.
Or it might be interesting. It might be showing up something about the different ways in which the slightly different things that they're querying. Could be
absolutely
part of your research.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Or it could be a problem, as you say. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you all very much. We look forward to the release of more data and more tools. And I know there are several tools coming out of Helsinki very soon that I look forward to. And just to say thanks again to the live audience, and join us next week, Thursday, November 11th, for a session on named entity recognition. If you've been following this, you've done some named entity recognition yourself before. Every time you tag a place name in a text of some kind, that is annotating a named entity. But Monica and Katie Madonna and Ludovic Monclat are going to talk about tools and scripts for slightly more automated named entity recognition. So do join us for that next week. Thank you all again, Nicole, Marja, Francesco.
Thank you.
Thank you.